All right. Hello, everyone. I am super excited to come to you today to talk about one of the most highly requested topics that I get over on YouTube. And we've been talking a lot about it on LinkedIn as well. Today, I'm going to be chatting with you about how to fix a toxic workplace. However, I'm not going to do it alone. For this one, I needed some help. So you guys know that I work with you and I work with individuals who are in a toxic workplace in navigating it, surviving it, escaping it, and recovering from it. However, I brought on my friend today, Tiffany. Tiffany is the yin to my yang. She is actually working on the other side and helping companies that maybe have a little bit of dysfunction, maybe are toxic AF, reform. So she is helping build better workplaces for us to all enjoy. I'm going to jump to a bio just to tell you a little tiny bit about her. As I am doing that, I would love to know who you are, where you're joining from. Are you in a toxic workplace? What questions do you have that we can help you with today? So just as you pop that in, let me tell you a little bit more official stuff about Tiffany. So Tiffany is a transformative HR curator of culture. How amazing is that? Her why is to help build more psychologically safe organizations and cultures and stronger leadership to support the people and processes within organizations. She's also the co-author of a children's book, Can a Zebra Change Its Stripes? Which, by the way, I just ordered on Amazon and it arrives tomorrow, and I'm super excited to read that with my kids. And that actually teaches children about embracing differences and how important is that. And I'm guessing the adults reading it could probably learn a thing or two. Tiffany loves serving her community and believes that together is better. So without any further ado, I'm just going to bring Tiffany up here with me.
Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Going well. Hi, everyone.
I am so excited. So as me and Tiffany were just chatting behind the scenes, and I've been looking forward to this chat all week. And I hope that you guys are as excited. We have a few people here. It looks like we have Joshua is here with us. Azadeh. I'm not going to try to pronounce your username, but hello. And we also have Chris here. So for those of you, we know that you're here. We can see that there's people watching. If you want to say hello, please let me know. One thing before we jump into it, Tiffany, is if anyone has questions that they don't want me putting on screen, just put private in the comment and I'll make sure, because I know some of you might have more sensitive questions for us throughout the discussion today that you don't want us blasting on the internet. So just keep that in mind. And we have a whole bunch of people saying hello. So we have Sarah. We have another Sarah. We have Robert. We have Betsy. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for you all to be here. So if you don't already, grab your coffee. And you guys know that I like to just get straight into it. And we have an hour. And I feel like, Tiffany, the hour is going to be a little bit tight for us. There's so much to talk about. Okay, so I like to just jump straight in. We've been talking. So one of the discussions, and my YouTube video 2 days ago was Coworkers, You're Not Your Family. We've been talking about that over on LinkedIn as well. And one of the things that I would really love for you is to start off with getting your take on that philosophy of the work family and the company family, and how you've actually seen that from your perspective in HR and helping companies create positive workplaces.
Yes. So that is sometimes an interesting dynamic because we often hear, well, we're a family here. We're like a big family, and companies like to use that as a selling point. And I'm all for employer brand. I work with employers on that too. However, the problem becomes when that's not the reality that people walk into, or where you say that, but you haven't built a culture up that supports it. And so that's tough. That's why we have policies too, interestingly, that are around nepotism. And we might say that maybe we don't want to hire people because your cousin's here or whatever, but yet in the culture itself, that contradicts itself as well, because it's like, well, we're just one big happy family here, or how come you can't get along with Susie, John? And that's tough because people kind of get branded if they're more private. So we're not always creating these inclusive workplaces. So I've had to have those conversations with leaders, with teams, because you got to do what you say in order for culture to stick.
Oh, 100%. And I know some people like to hang out with their coworkers all of the time and stuff like that. Some people don't. Work-life boundaries are really important for some people, and like being able to cater to like each person's needs. I think it's so hard, but it's also so important. I'm
Yeah.
just taking a look. The chat is already lit. Looks like Kevin is here. We have Enrique. Hello, everyone.
Good to see them here too. Yes,
So,
G's here. Lots of people.
oh my
Hello,
gosh.
people. We love you.
Yeah. Okay, so obviously the topic today, toxic workplaces, how to fix it. So let's start off with like the most fundamental question. A workplace is toxic. Who, in your opinion, can actually fix it?
It really needs to be executives and the leadership team, those senior leaders, even the frontline leaders, but they can't do that without the buy-in of the next level. And so what I've unfortunately seen is people who are in these frontline manager roles who really love their team, who want to make such a difference and an impact. And at some point there becomes a roadblock, right? Because the leader above them and or above that is not supportive and they may not be doing the right things. And so I will say that employees do have to own the culture too, but they should not, and I've seen this, people should not be responsible for fixing a toxic work culture. That is not the employee's job. That is leadership, that is org culture, and that is supported by HR. We are not to fix your cultures either. I gotta throw that out there because we get tasked with that as well. I see some of my HR folks, I know they agree.
And I feel like especially on YouTube, I give HR a hard time, and spoiler alert, that's my next video. But I do feel like sometimes we lean too heavily on HR because like HR to a certain degree has been tasked with employee experience, but often they're also not fully empowered to own employee experience because ultimately if the leaders at the top are toxic AF or aren't like don't have a vested interest in building an inclusive, positive workspace for everybody, then like they're only going to be able to accomplish so much.
Yeah.
That's the hard part. I'm just taking a quick look. This is like one thing that I have not mastered in Alive is like balancing off of the chat, which is like moving. You guys are awesome. And I love when the chat is a party, but it is hard to keep up and have conversation, which is like one of like the most privileged wines that I've had this week, quite honestly.
We like to keep it real around here.
Yeah, no, but, and actually one thing that I thought of today, and I'm just going to like bomb this on you, is as I was writing, like I wrote a post on LinkedIn about kind of my experience with a toxic workplace. So one thing that like I personally struggled with, and I want to get your take on this, is like, obviously for a company and for human resources and employee experience, a lot of companies like create like identities around being a part of their culture, and like their actual company has a culture, which is a great thing. But also like sometimes I feel like we got like wrapped up into those identities where it like keeps us stuck. So the story that I shared today was about when I was working with a toxic manager. And what actually stalled me out was I got stuck in the identity of I can work with anyone. And that became like, that was my ethos because that was one of like the core things across my career. And I kind of felt like even if I quit, which I'm very open on YouTube, exit strategy, unless you can actually fix it, is generally the most effective, but we'll come back there. Like I would love to get your thoughts in terms of like for professional, like obviously as someone who works with companies, but also as someone who is a professional, like how do you think people can approach the balance between like identity, kind of suffering the obstacles, and disassociating and like being ready to be like, okay, like this is something that isn't being fixed. If that makes sense. That was a long, convoluted question.
Yeah, it's in a good way. It's just a lot to unpack, right? And I'm starting to like think through some of the situations I've seen in supporting employees and organizations that I've been through myself. Kevin, okay. No, but that I love that you're talking about identity because there's the company culture and identity, and there's also the employee's identity. And I just was having this conversation with some women about how we have to establish for ourselves, just like companies establish their values, what are your personal values? And do those, are they aligned with the organization or do they conflict? And if you don't do that work, you will end up regretting it. Trust me, I've been there. And so you can't just trust, unfortunately, the organization to say that, but and you have to trust your intuition too, because sometimes we stay too long because to your point, I can fix it. I can get along with anybody. I can do this, but not everyone or everything is meant for us. And so having that exit strategy that you talked about is key. Having your support network of friends and family. I've had bosses who I've been like, look, this just, I can't. It's not going to work. It's not you, it's them. Because sometimes it's the organization and you have a great boss.
Yeah.
So recognizing and root causing what the actual issue is a powerful exercise. And yes, an exit strategy, because I've had times where I'm like, I'm done. And I just left. And that's obviously not great for our finances and stuff, but I never tell people to just sit in a toxic environment either. So plan, what that's going to look like, what support you need, what resources you need as you move along.
Yes. And like, I mean, in an ideal world, everyone would just be able to walk away and be able to weather that storm. But there's like real financial decisions, there's like logistical stuff, like all of that stuff. I love how you touched on though, like that you actually spoke to your manager, because I think sometimes when we think of toxic workplaces, we always think that like everyone there is toxic, and obviously your bosses as well. But it's also important when you are still in it, and especially if you can't leave, to like find people who can actually support you.
Yeah.
And like can even help you, maybe like probably your boss wasn't helping you get another job, but they probably can play a role in doing something like giving you references or maybe like making an introduction.
And I had a boss who was like, I will help you. Like, I will help you look, because it's bad when your boss is like, I get it. I get it. Do what you got to do. I support you.
Oh my
Just
gosh.
keep
And
us
they're like,
posted and I'll help you look. And I'll pass
and they're like doing the
opportunities
same
your way.
thing.
Yeah, that's happened too. That's happened too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, and obviously, like, and you probably see this all the time, like, it's not just impacting, like, you are not the only person being impacted in most
Yes.
cases,
Yeah.
right? It is going to be multiple people at multiple levels. And like, I also feel like you're fortunate, like, if you do have a supportive boss like that, because like behind the scenes, your boss can be like kind of an umbrella for some of the toxic stuff and like provide some like level of shielding. So for you, like you come in and work with companies that like, I don't want to like call the people that you work with toxic or the companies you work with toxic. So I'm trying to use like really nice language. But there is
My
like
clients are amazing. Or we wouldn't work together.
but no company is perfect, right? And this is another thing where like a lot of things that we see in toxic companies, like I've done a video on toxic workplace signs and there's like 15 different signs, but spoiler alert, those things exist at all companies. Like the gossip, backstabbing, politics, like all of that stuff exists everywhere. No company is perfect. No company is impervious. For you, like, obviously you have companies that have a level of self-awareness and they want to be better. Like, is there something that you think has helped companies that you've worked with and your clients get to that point where they know that there is something wrong? And is there something that like someone that is an employee or maybe even like in management, because there are definitely people that are in leadership and senior leadership positions that watch my channel, how can you help nurture the decision makers to want to do better?
I think it starts with having that awareness at the outset and wanting to support your team, and wanting to support and actually supporting are two different things. So it also takes courage to talk to your next line leader if they're not supporting you, and maybe to have some tough conversations. People do not like to have those. We see leaders and employees avoiding those, but that only makes the situation worse. So a lot of times what I see is most people aren't trying to do the wrong thing. There are some, unfortunately, but they often don't know where to turn or what to do. So it's like, well, we kind of know that maybe these people don't get along, and maybe this employee is a bully, but like they've been here for 20 years. We don't want to rock the boat. Or they're just like, something's off. I sense it. I feel it, but I don't know. I can't put my finger on it. But you can't ignore that. That's a good place to start. If you sense it, you need to do something. As a leader, that's a leader's responsibility.
Yeah. For people that aren't in leadership, that are in it, I'd also like to pick your brain in terms of like, you come from the HR world, and what paths would you encourage people to explore, like if they don't have the option of just like pulling the plug and getting getting out of there as quickly as possible? Like when you were like in a former life, like have you had to work with employees that have been in it, and like what advice do you give them?
Yeah, that one's always tough. I think you have to first be honest with yourself. And if you are at a point that you've made that decision, that can be, it doesn't have to be tomorrow, as we've said. You can create an exit strategy to figure out what that looks like, maybe next month or maybe in 2 weeks, because I always advise that people at least a couple weeks or whatever the policies
Mhm.
are around that.
Yeah.
But they're usually loose guidelines. But you want to be self-aware first, because
Yeah.
sometimes it is us and it's not the employer. So first, making sure that you're checking your biases, that you are doing what you need to do so that you are set up well if you have to go to another employer and somebody's not like, well, they weren't performing or they weren't coming to work. So you don't want to just be like, well, I don't like this job, I'm just not going to come to work, because that's you're going to be the one injured by that in the end. So I think, if you have maybe an HR colleague that you can confide in. I've had people come to me and
Yeah.
be like, this isn't working. We've met every couple of weeks or something to talk things through, we've had coffee or lunch. Like, here are
Yeah.
some options to think about. And sometimes it's not leaving the organization. You might be able to find a different department, a different role. Maybe it's just that role or that manager that's
Yeah.
not right for you, but I wouldn't be
Yeah.
so hasty to leave the organization if there may
Yeah.
be something internally still.
Yeah. I love that you hit on the self-awareness piece too, because I feel like that's something that it's easy to be like, oh, this place is toxic. This team is toxic. Like it's a them problem. It's much harder to say, oh, this might actually be an internal thing as well.
Mhm.
And I think even when you escape, this is something that I've seen, is that when you're in an ideal situation at work, we develop like coping mechanisms to navigate it. So if you have an awful boss, you are going to pick up habits that are going to help you deal with that awful boss. The thing is, when you don't have the awful boss anymore, those habits are still there. And it can actually
Mhm.
like reframe a toxic environment where it would not be toxic otherwise. So like doing that
Yeah.
work is so important. And like, I feel like that's not being discussed. So I think like in general, toxic workplaces is treated like a BuzzFeed listicle as opposed to like a serious issue with real trauma that actually happens. Now,
Yeah.
another thing that actually I want to dig in, and it was from your bio. And this is something that I actually, for my YouTube peeps, I have not talked a lot about this. And since Tiffany is an expert, let's take advantage. Psychological safety. This is a term that
Mhm.
I know not everyone has heard. So, like, just for a starter, what is psychologically safe? What is psychological safety, and why is it so important in a workplace?
Ooh, I love it. So there's so much behind it. There's obviously like science behind it, right? And all of those physiological types of things. But when I describe it, it really does lend into the culture itself. What does it feel like to walk in there? Does it feel tense? Does it feel okay for me to be who I authentically am? I know people put the word authentically. Does it feel, can I use my voice? Am I celebrated? Am I elevated? Am I given opportunities to thrive? Is
Yeah.
credit stolen away from me? It's all the things that, there's Maslow's hierarchy. So we have to have our basic needs met before we can get to self-actualization. And the
Yeah.
organization plays a part in that. So we need to have our kind of human needs met. Can we even be human in the workplace? And is it
Yeah.
safe, like physically safe? Is it
Mhm.
a place where I feel like, uh-oh, I can't say that and we're going to tiptoe and we have to walk on eggshells? Not psychologically safe. And it's important because if you don't have those elements, you
Mhm.
will not have an engaged team. You will not retain people. People don't want to be
Yeah.
there. They're not going to do their best work. And guess who suffers then? Your customers. You're also going to suffer a poor employer brand. And that makes you lose your competitive advantage. Like, it's going to be ripe with risk. We try to mitigate risk. No one wants to be sued. That's not a fun place. The list goes on and on and on. but there's such a business case for it. It's just basically, I describe it as doing the right thing.
Right. How can someone know if they're in a place like, because I feel like it's like a toxic, like obviously there's like a bridge and overlap. Like a toxic workplace is not a psychologically safe place and vice versa.
Mhm.
But I like, do you feel like there's a nuance, like those are two different things, or do you feel like they're the same thing?
Um, I think I look at I look at a good culture as psychologically safe. I think
Yeah.
that there's definitely a psychology to toxicity because we see microaggressions or like described in my LinkedIn post, the blatant lies, the things. I
Yes.
literally have had people like circle my desk and trying to intimidate me because they couldn't say something because they knew if they did, like the games, the psychological games that get played or taking away
Yeah.
opportunities from people. There's it's such a it's polar opposites in terms of what's safe and what's not. But it all plays a part in the culture. That can be a good culture and be psychologically safe, or it can be a bad culture and be ripe with people circling your desk like a zoo animal, which is real fun.
Right.
Yeah. And I
So,
don't say that to be like condescending per se. I mean,
yeah.
like literally in the sense of how you watch caged animals circle. This is what this was like for me. And think
Right.
about what that does to a person mentally.
Well, and like subconsciously, you know that you need to get help, right? But then there's like that barrier of like, you know that it's not going to work out for you.
Yeah.
Or like that it's going to cause a
Yeah.
bigger problem. And that's such a hard place to be. But I also
Mhm.
feel like, do you think that this is something that people are aware of? Or is this something like I personally, when I was in a toxic workplace, was like cognitive dissonance was very strong and I was not accepting the fact. Do you feel like that the same dynamic occurs in a place that isn't psychologically safe?
I think so, because I think we become victims, so to speak, of our environments. And there's all these kind of drama roles that people play. And sometimes we feed into those because we feel left without options. We may or may not know who our HR person is. And if we do, sometimes we don't trust that person. I
Yeah.
mean, hello, I am honest about some of the shortcomings that sometimes exist in my own profession. I think
Yeah.
that if people feel like they're boxed in and they don't have options, that's when they're prone to like snap. Then we see a higher propensity for workplace violence. We see people who may go through depression. I had that situation from a very toxic environment, and the work's gonna slide. It's just not a good situation. So we have to always be coming from a place of wanting to do the best by our employees and supporting them. And support looks a lot of different ways. Maybe it's like not constantly canceling their one-on-ones because you have better things to
Which, if you're a manager, like people leadership is kind of the most important thing, but maybe that's just my heavily biased opinion.
do. Yeah, I agree.
I think like actually, so my friend Makita was on a couple of weeks ago, and she actually like she works with new managers, and we talked about like the kind of jump and the gap in training for new leaders as well, which I think like when you don't enable your leaders, they end up becoming bad leaders. And that actually also breeds toxic work environments and like all of the nasty stuff that
Yes.
also happens. And it just, then you have people that are not empowered. But the real problem is like actually a knowledge gap that would be so easy to fix.
Yeah, that's work I do as well. But you have to identify that organizations and leaders don't. Often say that our leaders get left behind in the process because they haven't been mentored. They're not given the tools. What I love is when people identify that right off the bat, like, oh, look, a new leader. We've moved him from an IC to this technical role into a leadership role. They might need some support to do that. So give
Yeah.
them the training, give them a partner, give them a coach, whatever that takes.
Yeah. Well, and then like, so I've noticed a lot of people, especially over on YouTube, tend like they're working in smaller organizations where like they don't have HR teams or they have like the one HR person. But also those companies, like the structure that I've consistently seen, and I'd like to pick your brain on this as well, is like it tends to be like the owner founder And then
Mhm.
they end up having managers, but no one has training, and like they're all modeling the person at the top. And that person isn't necessarily the best person to model your leadership off of.
Mhm. That happens. That happens a lot. I think that um, our owners sometimes get put in those
Yeah.
situations, and they are just like, well, I don't know, but they're afraid to say they don't know because either the environment's not psychologically safe, or they're like, listen, I need to keep my job, or they just don't know what they don't know. That's where sometimes people don't intend to do the wrong thing, but that's why you have to always be checking the pulse, checking the temperature. Just ask people how they feel and how they're doing. That's what good support looks like. It's not
Yeah.
that complicated. It's really not.
Yeah. And I like the point that Thomas brought up here about bad bosses being protected by management because they're groomed for a better position. The Peter principle like really starts to come into play in some places as well. And that isn't always a healthy principle to have alive and well in an
No,
organization.
no, no. Yeah, it's like you just keep breeding. And I often talk about the rotating bad tires, and we do that with leaders and we do it with employees sometimes. Sometimes we need to make some different decisions.
Yeah. Actually, this is a good question. How can you ask about psychological safety in an interview? Is there something like for people that are considering a move, and especially like people who've left a toxic workplace environment already? Is there any like indicators or signs that, because I know like you're careful about who you work with, is there
Mhm.
like any indicators that you can find from the outside that can help keep people from landing in a not so great workplace?
I think that a lot of times you can just like read body language in an interview, and this is where your intuition will serve you well. And I know that many of our interviews are remote now, they're
Yeah.
virtual, but you can still tell a lot. Like, is that person rolling their eyes up? Are they shifting their seat when they give you an answer that seems like it should be straightforward? Are the company values on the website not matching what's coming out of that person's mouth? Do you know someone, or can you get connected to someone on LinkedIn for an informational interview to find out? Because of course, it's a courting process. People are not, they're not going to show their bad side until you're there. You're probably going to find out for 3 to 6 months, sometimes sooner. But it's about figuring out what you want and what your values are. And I'm a fan of, and it's worked well for me, to ask the right questions centered around my own values. If you want a leader who's not a micromanager, you want to ask them what support looks like in their team, or what do they see success as in the first 30, 60, 90. Now, if they can't identify that, that might be a problem, that this role may not even be a match for you, because the role may not be as it seems when you come in. So I I would say to definitely think about questions that are going to not just something you can pull off the website or the role itself, like really dig deep into the culture. You really want to know, what do these people stand for? Is it matching what they say? And don't be afraid to throw some tough questions. One question that a lot of companies cannot stand for candidates to ask, and I just had this conversation 2 days ago. Why is the role open? I
Yeah.
have personally had somebody tell me that's none of my concern. And I had someone the other day tell me that the person was just, you could just tell they were equivocating. They weren't going to really get to it. And it was
Right.
like, that's a red flag.
The
Be
red flags are
mindful of
flying there.
it. Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
siren silently just blasting off. No,
Run. Run.
no, and I like to ask about leadership style as well in terms of like how they actually view their job as a leader, because
Yes.
having a misalignment there, like some people like, this is going to sound weird. Some people like to have a lot of guidance and supervision and they want to check in and stuff like that. Some people are on the opposite end of the spectrum where like it's high autonomy, and if their manager so much as asks for an update, they're going to feel micromanaged. But knowing what that manager is actually like and how even like the leader above them is like is going to give an
Mhm.
idea into kind of like the culture and ethos there. Obviously it's not going to tell the full picture, and people don't always tell you all of the things. I think I actually have a video on YouTube that like goes into like other ways. Like I love looking obviously at Glassdoor. I'm a huge
Mhm.
proponent as well for you to do reference checks on a company that you're considering working for. And not just in the interview setting, but find someone who has left recently and talk to them.
Mhm. Yes,
See what comes
the
out.
real uncovering.
And just to pop the screen. So say what brings you to this position open today. So I'll put that there just so everyone, if you want, can take a
I like that.
screenshot and keep that for later. My challenge as HR has always been when asking the question of how people are doing, I usually get the response that I'm not the first HR person to ask and nothing gets done anyway.
Oh,
That sucks. Honestly,
so
like,
common. This is like my career right here. And G and I have talked. We've met, so I know this world well.
yeah,
And what I would say to that is to just be open, because I've had leaders who have been like, yeah, you're like my eighth HR person. Like, what are you going to come in and do that the last one didn't do? And I've had employees who like have walked out of meetings on me and said, like, I don't need to listen to this. You're not going to help me anyway. And I'm like, you haven't even given me a chance. So be open. And
yeah,
sometimes people might have some struggles. They may not be a good HR person, so to speak. But you
yeah,
have to be open to that, because I get a lot of praise because of the way I do operate and the way I practice HR. So
yeah.
if you're open, you at least, don't block your blessings is what I would say.
Totally. No, and I think like, especially when we look at like toxic workplaces, like one of the big, again, like blaring alarm bells is like where trust doesn't exist, there's problems, because then you're going to have withholding of information. Why aren't people trusting each other? Is it because they're taking credit and throwing people under the bus? Like, and those questions before you join an organization can be informative. And obviously, once you get in, if you see that like lack of trust is rampant, that is such a hard thing. Is that something that like you've come across organizations that are struggling with? And like, for any leaders or managers who are just kind of trying to do their best, maybe not in a toxic workplace, but in a workplace that has an opportunity to be better, like how can you start to build trust so that people can talk to you about the actual issues to create a more positive work environment?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I would say to start is, I said before, like supporting your team, asking your team questions, having their back. So not telling your team one thing and then running and telling your boss something else. Because when that happens, we obviously erode a lot of trust. And I've seen
Yeah,
that happen, where people pleasers like, I just want to tell you this because I don't want you to be mad at me, employee, but I'm really going to go over here and tell someone else the other thing. So it's,
yeah,
not canceling those one-on-ones. It's asking those powerful, curious questions. You never know what will unfold if you ask a question, and people like that. They like to be asked about their opinion. They like to share in the vision. So to the ability that you can bring your team along if you're creating a new process, or
yeah,
you're working on a project, get their opinions on that. Just because you're the leader doesn't make you the person who needs to know it all. And you want your team's input, because then you get their buy-in. Ask them who else they think needs to be pulled in, and help them be collaborative. So that doesn't always happen either. I've seen leaders who kind of hold their team up from asking questions of other teams because they feel like it's going to make their team look inferior. And it's like, no, there's strength in numbers. That's going to be powerful perspectives. And now you're being more inclusive, and that breeds diversity of thought and of other things. So we want those things to be happening.
yeah, absolutely. I'm going to change direction a little bit. And it's actually based on a comment that I get a lot on YouTube. And I feel like it's easy to form this belief when you have been in a toxic workplace. Are all companies toxic, or do all companies have the capability of being toxic?
Ooh. I do not think that all companies are toxic. I've worked for some great leaders, great companies. Every single company, though, does have the ability to be toxic. And so it's in those environments of where trust is lacking, where leaders haven't been set up for success, where employees are maybe promoted or given a role or brought into the organization, and then we lied to them about what they were going to be doing. We didn't do the internal work to make sure that what we brought them in to do was going to be the thing. And now we're going to fight and argue about like what the thing is and tell them, well, we just brought you in. You just got to do the job. The door is right there. So I think we'll have to be honest with ourselves as organizations and as leaders to best support employees. But yes, every workplace, if they don't do the right things, they don't listen to their people, and you don't care, you're not empathetic, has the propensity to be toxic.
Yeah. Now, drawing from that, because I think especially like as we think about like toxic workplace exit strategies and stuff, what does a great, like, I mean, you work with companies to help them be great companies. So like, what does a great company look like from like a structural and HR perspective that can help people look for a great place to land?
I think, it's those companies that want to hear their employees' voice and who don't just give the employee engagement survey just to give it, but they actually do action planning and they follow up. One of my clients actually kind of stripped their mission, vision, and values and had their team kind of help build them. Now, the values primarily, those typically are core, right? So those kind of stayed. But then you can take apart some of the other pieces and you can create this shared vision and purpose. People have to have purpose and meaning in their work, or they're not going to be excited about it. It's not going to light them up like it lights me up every day to do my job. So you have to have the right structure. And it doesn't, maybe you have just 6 employees right now. You don't need HR. So you probably don't. If you need 6, you may need me to come in and help be a thought partner, but you don't have to have a dedicated person. But I would say to have someone in your space, your peer, who can help support you through any issues that arise. Because people are people, they get messy a little bit. Cultures will erode if you don't nurture them.
100%. And I've seen like, especially coming from like tech startups, I've seen startups that like had a couple of 100 people before they made their first actual HR hire. And we're not working with consultants or getting any support. And when you want to lay a good foundation, especially if you're building a company, you want it to be an awesome company, because if you have awesome people doing awesome things, your company will be successful. This is like research backed. Like it's not just, it's like sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows, right?
Yeah.
No, but it's like
so true.
But also like I love that you do this as well, because it like, and talking about it here, because like also like people need to know that there's other ways of doing things, especially if they're in a small company. And I also feel like if you're a leader at a small company that doesn't have any, human resources staff or human resources support, like knowing that that is an option is something that like, if you are in a position to make that suggestion to a decision maker, or if you potentially have the ability to make that decision yourself, there's options.
There are. Yes. You have to ask the questions, and we can't, one of the pitfalls here for organizations and teams is, well, we've always done it this way, or we tried. Now, listen, I've had a couple of people who I've prospected with who have said, well, we tried that HR thing before. Well, sometimes it's a matter of, is that person a match for you, or did you ask the right questions? Did they ask you the right questions? Did they meet you where you're at on your journey? And that makes a huge difference. This is an exploratory process, just like an interview. So there has to be a match, but we have to be honest internally in organizations to say, did we do everything we could? And if you want to see your employees, CFOs are not designed to be HR people. And that happens by default sometimes in lean organizations, in startups. Perfectly fine. I see it in my clients, and that's okay. But that you shouldn't be tasked with compliance and all the other things. And you're trying to be the visionary, right? Like these things don't work together well for too long. So
and then, and then we're using the excuse of lean organization and like running startup and scrappy and all of that stuff. Like, I feel like there's a lot of like, again, like my bias is coming in from like tech startup, and that culture has a lot of things that are quite toxic inherently in terms of what they expect from people. And it's not always reasonable. And, getting people in place again to make sure that that foundation is right, especially for scale, because you cannot scale a company if people keep on quitting because
Yeah.
it's awful. Like, let's just call it what it is.
And it's expensive. This is like one of the world's greatest mysteries to me. Why would you spend all this time to bring someone in, lie to them potentially in the process, and then just not do what you need to do to nurture them, to show them a little love? That's okay. And just have them leave. That is extremely, one, what do you think's happened in your brand out there? Also, it's expensive to hire someone else. Turnover is not cheap.
Yeah. I actually, I came across someone that, and I'm going to like be as ambiguous as possible about this, but I came across a person who was at a startup and their team was hiring and they were having a lot of difficulty acquiring talent, which is fair for startups. Like, it's nice when you have like a name brand employer like Google or Facebook and you're getting like thousands of applicants and like people are like crawling over themselves, but this company was not there yet. And there was issues at their company, and they actually, when they interviewed candidates, would knowingly conceal it because they're like, well, if I told them, no one would want to work here. But it's like, instead of fixing the issue, or like you're now aware of the issue, but you're going to deceive someone who's going to come in and realize it, and they're going to leave pretty quickly.
It's counterintuitive, isn't it?
And it's like, there's like, they're going to find out.
And it's probably not going to take long.
It's probably not going to take long. But the other thing is, like, for the same issue, like, there's things that I think are highly toxic. And there's things that, like, my toxic workplace, there was things that were like massive, massive issues that for other people was like a total perk. Which sounds weird, but like one of the things was like yelling and swearing at each other. And some people, like, I was like, okay, that's probably not a good way to treat each other. Like, it just doesn't feel good. But there was some people that are like, oh, it's great based on who you are and like how you talked about like at the start of our conversation and like what your values are need to align. But then you also have the startup thing where like startups don't like defining values.
Or they do, but only for certain people in certain roles, or there's only external focus. We're not going to care what our people do inside. We're just going to burn them out and expect them. I had this conversation with someone last week where they were talking about the startup culture, particularly. I hate to pick on tech, like I have a client in tech too, but and it's great. But sometimes that we can't lean on a culture where we're just like, the harder you work, the faster you work, you need to be in here on the weekends doing all this stuff. And so this person that I was talking to was talking about how people are getting just so burnt out. They're afraid to say anything because it looks bad. It looks like, well, you know what you got yourself into. It's fast paced. Well, do we really need to like burn people out though? That's not serving anyone.
No. And I mean, again, like going back to the research, if you're working more than 55 hours a week, it stops having a point. Your productivity literally falls off of a cliff after 55 hours a week. I've worked with startups in the past, and I've had clients in startups that like people were doing 80 hours a week, but like 55% was literally sitting at their desk making appearances, obviously like before quarantine. But just like literally being in the office, like watching YouTube and Hulu or Netflix or whatever. And it was just to make it look like they were being productive. And it was because that was like appearances were more important to leadership than actual results. Tech startup culture has a way to go. Actually, next week, I have my friend Charlene coming on live because her book is coming out. She's a burnout recovery specialist. And I have learned so much from her. And I think that a lot of her clients are in tech as well, because like the two just seem to go hand in hand.
Yeah, and healthcare, I dealt with it a lot in healthcare. You know, we burn out our healthcare professionals too. So,
especially right now.
Oh my gosh, yes. Please, I hope people are finding strategies for these frontline workers. We need them, and just talk about psychological safety, the things that they see. We had an employee who passed away when I worked in healthcare, and that was
Oh my God.
so traumatic. And you talk about like if people didn't have the resources, if they didn't have HR, if they didn't have way, and they're dealing with all this grief, not only from what they see with their patients and the families every,
Yeah.
but now you have like your coworker who used to work right alongside you. How do you deal with that? And so you have to have somebody to talk to have these structures in place to support your teams. You can't just leave people like that. It's not good.
No. And like, I feel like I abuse the term, but I don't think I abuse the term. Like, I think everyone right now is sitting in a collective trauma, and I'm nervous about when the world starts to open up and we start to go back to our offices and everything, because I feel like when we escape, people are really going to like realize the severity of like what we have experienced, and I feel like workplaces are going to have so much support, because even like I started talking to people, like, because some locations like offices are going back in and stuff, and people are really nervous. There's a high amount of anxiety that some companies are not dealing with.
Yeah. And I just had that conversation with a client a couple of weeks ago, like, well, what do we do? And asking their teams, you have to pull people in. Now, this is a business decision at the end of the day. And as employees, that has to be part of the agreement that you've come into, and you have to understand at the end of the day, it's going to be business, and you hope that person, those leadership teams do the right thing. But sometimes we just need to ask. Like, I had a client and they thought their team was going to want to be remote, and their team actually was like, I'm cool with like hybrid, or I really want to come back. So this is where if we don't ask the question, we make the wrong decisions. Fact-based decisions always.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And I feel like there's so much discussion, and it feels like everyone wants to just be remote. I've had the same thing where I've talked to so many people that are so excited to be able to get back into the office. Maybe like not right now because it's not an option everywhere, but when it is, like, I personally, like, I work out of a co-working space and I'm excited to go back to the office, and I'm a huge introvert. Sarah had a great question, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Tiffany. So how do you feel about the manage up or manage out mindset?
Oh, I am a fan of candor. And so I believe in managing up. But when you have an environment that isn't psychologically safe, it's like you get perceived as the troublemaker or the person who is just challenging up just to do so. But there's nothing wrong with a safe, respectful question around process, around things. I'm a very curious person, and so I ask a lot of questions just because that's how I learn. I have to conceptualize to break it down. And so should be asking yourself, leaders and organizations, why you have such a problem with someone who you perceive as challenging because they're asking a question. You should want inquisitive people and people who are critical thinkers. And I don't, just because you manage up, I don't think that means that you should be managed out. And I will be honest that I've seen the wrong thing be done here, and people kind of get this target on their back because the organization has deemed them as trouble, or you're trying to take my job, you're trying to show me up, versus just letting that person have a voice. Doesn't mean there's no malintent here.
I feel like insecure leadership is like, I can haul you on here and talk to you for another few hours on that topic.
Maybe next
because
time.
that leads to so many of the issues, and it leads to the lack of trust, and it leads to the competition, and it leads to idea thievery, and it leads to psychological safety. Because when someone is not secure in themselves, they take it out on everyone around them. And it's like that, I'm going to feel better about myself by dragging you down instead of like me feeling better by lifting you up. Like, and the latter is so much more powerful. Now, I just wanted to acknowledge someone over on YouTube who not only is dealing with a toxic boss, but also her sister passed away and didn't get any support. And I just wanted to say, I'm so sorry.
Yes, condolences. How how at the end of the day, this is where I say do the right thing. How are you aware of something like this, so significant in
Yeah.
someone's life that will inevitably impact their work? There is no workaround. We're whole beings. So to try to
Yeah.
compartmentalize us, and when this person has lost their
Yeah.
sister and we have no empathy to even say something, this is where that avoidance does not
Yeah.
serve us well. I'm so sorry for your loss and that you had that experience.
So one thing, like coming from Canada where we have bereavement leave in most provinces and it's paid and it's legislated, it's beyond me how it's not a law here, though I think there's a lot of laws missing. But any employer that does not give that and does not give the support and even just a basic acknowledgement of saying I'm sorry is the lowest level that you can give. And to just not do that, like, exit strategy. And if you need
Yeah.
support, connect with me on LinkedIn and just like let me know that that was you, and I'm happy to help you strategize your exit, because that's gonna, I think it's hard enough. And like I lost my mom when I was in a toxic workplace, and like those two traumas compounded on each other, and it created like a lot of anxiety and depression for me as well. And I wasn't even aware of it until like I had exited it. And I don't want anyone to go through that. It's just awful. So however I can support, please tell
And
me.
also just quickly, for organizations and leaders, part of what becomes this toxic cycle is leaning too hard on the policies or blaming HR. Oh,
Yeah.
nope, that was just your uncle. We can't, again, that's why a lot of organizations are moving away from such rigidity as it relates
Yeah.
to these policies, because who puts a tag or a certain amount of days? And I understand we have to have some structure. There's an
Sure.
accounting and finance piece to that too, but my uncles are like fathers to me. Why does the organization get to dictate?
Yeah. I, you know, I have seen some leaders that have been like, they'll turn the blind eye and they'll let it go, and like are so amazing and so supportive, like outside of the HR structures as well. Not to say that every company has that ability, but we got to be more human at work. That's the thing.
Mhm. That's the common thread here, right?
Yeah. Now we have 7 more minutes. So I do want to get some more questions in, but before we just like open up to Q&A, and if you have questions, please drop them in. Before we get there, just to make sure we don't like hit time, for anyone who wants to learn more about you, to follow you, and I already know, but I'm going to like ask you to tell me anyway. But where can people, like, if someone is interested in like having their company work with you, or they just want to like follow you because you're awesome and you put out great content, which I vouch for, where can they find you, Tiffany?
Yes, the easiest place is on LinkedIn. So I have a very active LinkedIn profile there. And I'm also on Clubhouse at T Castagno. You can go to my website, which Jennifer has so lovely put up here. So those are the easiest ways to find me. I do free hour consultations if you just need a thought partner or you're uncertain of what your next move is. I just did a fun consult yesterday on that. So
Awesome. So that is all there. And for people on LinkedIn, Tiffany is tagged. If not in this post, I think she's in the embed that this was for. So hopefully you can find her there. Just like search her name. Shouldn't be too complicated. And for people over on YouTube, what I'll do is I'll also come in after this is completed and I will update with her links. And I'll also, once it, like YouTube does this rendering thing and it takes a little while, but I'll also come back in and I'll timestamp. So anyone who wants to revisit any piece of the conversation, it'll be a little bit easier. Okay, I'm going to take a look through the chat and see what questions we can find here. And Tim also lost his uncle and needed some days off and Tim, I'm so sorry.
yeah, this is so what they shared is how you do it wrong. And that's kind of tied to what I was saying before. How about you ask if that person is okay and what support they need? How do I help support you? Because
Yeah.
do you really think that they're in the mindset to be at work or that that's their top focus? When I lost my dad, my team was like, what needs to come off your plate? We will, it doesn't even matter. Like we will figure it
Yeah.
out. Take care of your family.
100%. Now, Sarah also asks, how can we get leaders to understand when they are the source of the toxicity?
Ooh, see, this is where Sarah's managing up. If we feel safe to do that, and I do advocate for people to say, I feel like we're just not on the same page here. And this is language that I've used to be
Mm-hmm.
able to say someone has to be, first of all, we hope that there's enough EQ that the leader is self-aware, but we fully are aware that that's not always the case. Often it's not. So if we can't manage up, maybe it's using a chain of command, going to the next person, talking to HR and getting some talking
Yeah.
points of how you can have these conversations because they are difficult.
Yeah.
And leaders of leaders, we need you to come on along too and help us. We need you to stop avoiding these conversations, to just be okay with toxic behavior because this person brings in all the sales. It's not okay. Toxicity is toxicity.
Yeah. And this question as well, I thought was a great one. How can you stay professional in a toxic environment?
This is where your personal values really come to light. I am a person who's super positive, and I know that these situations can make you withdrawn and sad and angry and frustrated and all things that I am not as a human. And so I would say to that, while I know it's not easy, if your employer has an employee assistance program that you can go through to get some outside counsel or support,
Yeah.
that's confidential in nature. They're typically free. If you have a friend you can talk to about what's going on, maybe it's starting to look for a new job. Sometimes our hobbies outside of work
Yeah.
really help us. And that's helped me in these toxic situations to pour into other activities so that you
Yeah.
can still come to work and do what you need to do while you work on your exit strategy. So,
Yes. I also, for those of you on YouTube, I have a video called Toxic Workplace Survival, and it has some tips, but I also think like having a decompression routine after work, because I think one of the things that I see people struggle with most is like you're so drained from the day that you don't have the energy to do your hobbies and to do the things that make you happy or to look for another job. So like having that to re-energize yourself to be able to take the next step is also really important. Now, I think we have time for one more. So, how can you deal with gaslighting from a manager? They had a miscommunication on OT and got harshly chewed out. So, like, gaslighting is something that definitely happens in a toxic environment. Like,
mhm.
do you have any suggestions there, Tiffany?
I would say, you know, if you're comfortable to talk to that manager or if you have either site or organizational HR to talk to that person, but I would advocate for yourself and share that, you know, this is how I feel about this situation because it's their job to support you while you're going along. Now, we know that narcissistic people are not going to see that and then they may try to start retaliating, but this is where
Yeah.
those HR structures or their manager, there's always somebody above us, right? So if you're not comfortable talking to that person or they're retaliating against you, definitely need to be reporting that too. Sometimes there's an employee hotline as well, but use your resources.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're coming up on the hour in our last 60 seconds. First of all, Tiffany, thank you so much for joining
Thank
me.
you.
I'm gonna have to haul you back on because we have like a million things that we can be talking about. And I
Anytime,
just
my
like
friend, anytime.
so I sent Tiffany like a list of questions that like I knew that would come up. And I totally like went off the rails. So thank you, Tiffany,
I
for
love it.
being an awesome human being. Make sure and go in and connect with Tiffany. Follow Tiffany if you aren't already. Um, for like the last, like, if you were to like leave a parting note for people, what's the best advice that you have in terms of like mindset, navigating, like at the end of this, like what do you hope someone walks away with? And for those watching, what are you walking away with from this conversation? I'd love to hear from all of y'all.
I would say too, we've heard the theme come out in some of the things I've shared about advocacy, self-advocacy. So trust your instincts that you are doing the right thing. I never advocate for anybody to stay in a toxic workplace. Talk to one of us, whatever you have to do, but use your resources. And I would say to not become someone that you're not because of this workplace. Pour your energies where they are deserved and not into the toxicity of that workplace, because some of these people like that. So don't steal your own joy just because someone else is.
100%. And you do a Clubhouse room regularly too, right?
I do.
Let's get all some plugs in.
Yeah, so I mentioned Clubhouse, so I'm on there as at T Castagno every Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. I co-host a room with Angelica Patton, and we talk about all things HR. So it's called Let's Talk HR. If you are an iPhone user, they're working on it for Android, but you can find us there with all different topics. And feel free to listen in, come stage, all those fun things.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tiffany, for hanging with me. Thank you, everyone who joined in, kept the chat more lit. I'm going to have to go back to read all the comments.
I'm excited
YouTube, I think, kind of erases them. So for those of you on YouTube, I will do my best. LinkedIn, I'll be coming back at you. And again, thank you so much, Tiffany. Thank you, everyone. Have an awesome rest of your day.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.